Hey everybody, this is Stream, today we have we have a 8-game NBA slate here, and then we have two showdowns for the playing games for college basketball. Before I get started, you can guys smash that like and subscribe button. So I'm gonna run through the NBA first, and then we'll get in the college basketball at the end. The college basketball is gonna be pretty quick. So let's go ahead and get into this NBA slate here. We have an extensive injury report. I hate this slate. There's so many injuries, so many questionable tags, a bunch of guys out. There's going to be a ton of value plays that are going to look interesting, but there's definitely a lot of risk involved. So this is kind of be a Hail Mary type of slate. We have three games that have pretty high totals in the Indiana, Detroit, Sacramento, Toronto, and Utah, Oklahoma City. But we also have some other games that have some options because of all these injuries. So for the Miami Heat, Butler and Jovic are questionable, and Hero, Robinson, Love, and Richardson are out. For the Cavs, Mitchell, Mobley, Struss, and Wade are out. For the Pacers, Matherian is out. For the Detroit Pistons, Fonteseco is questionable. Sorry for butchering. Stewart, Thompson, and Grimes are out. For the Bucks, Giannis is out. For the Celtics, Brown, Holiday, and Hauser are questionable. For the Sacramento Kings, Huter and Lyles are out. For the Toronto Raptors, Barnes, Barrett, Quickly, Podol, Bouchard are out. For the Utah Jazz, Collins is questionable. Markkanen and Clarkson are out. For the Grizzlies, Aldama is questionable, and then basically everybody else is out. Morant, Smart, Pippen, Vince Williams, Kennard, Zaire Williams, Rose, and Stevens. For Golden State, Green is questionable. For the Philadelphia 76ers, Harris is questionable. Embiid, Melton, and Covington are out. For the Suns, Okogie is out. For the Clippers, Powell and Mann are both questionable, and Westbrook is out, but it does look like the core three are going to be available. For Portland, Thibault is questionable, Grant is doubtful, and Brogdon, Sharp, and Williams are out. So we have a lot to look at from that perspective. It is really difficult to find good core plays here today, but I do think we have some good guys, and I'll kind of get into them as I go through the slate. So let's go and get started here. So I'm going to start at the top here with Sabonis. Now Sabonis is priced up some, but this game does feature a high total, and Toronto is missing a lot of options. The real risk here is if this game gets out of hand, but Sabonis had a 60 fantasy point game against Toronto last time he played them, so he has a lot of potential to do that again. I do think this slate is going to be super high scoring, so simply getting 50-ish, 53 fantasy points out of him is not going to be ideal, but I do think that he can get over 55 or so, and that would definitely help us pay off. But Sacramento is favored by 11 points. In fact, every game on the slate except for one is a 9-point favorite or more. So it's going to be kind of really janky from that perspective. But I do think Sacramento is one of the teams you could choose to stack from as they're priced pretty fairly. Looking at Shea Alexander for Oklahoma City is another team I think is very favorable stacking wise today, as they have a nice plus matchup against Utah. Utah doesn't play any defense. Now, SGA has had some rough games the last few, so I'm a little concerned of it because he has had two bad games in the last five, but he has that big time upside as we know, and he is facing Utah, who's one of the weaker defensive teams right now. He's also playing uh, at home, which should give him a little bit of a boost as well. So he looks like a very fantastic play. I am going to try to make at least one lineup where I put Sabonis and Shea Alexander together just to see what I can do with that, with all the value potential on this slate, especially if it opens up as I get closer to lock here. Looking at Damian Lillard, Giannis is going to be out today, and that gives Lillard all sorts of upside. Now, he does have an unhappy matchup here against Boston, who is a good defensive team, and so that is a concern here. And there's also concern that Boston might blow out Milwaukee as they're over 10-point favorite. So obviously, I think Lillard's in play, but he's definitely risky, and he's definitely a contrarian play on the slate. Looking at another option at his price range, though, is De'Aaron Fox, who's played very well throughout the season. He has some ups and downs, but he's a little bit cheaper than SGA is, and he has just as much upside in this matchup, especially with Toronto missing so many options. He looks like he could have some upside. Again, I think Sacramento is a team that's stackable, but they are favored to win by 11 points. They do have that high total, which is nice, though. Then we're going to look at Chet Holmgren um, for Oklahoma City as well. Chet has played pretty well throughout the season, though he has some ups and downs lately. He's kind of got that boomer bust feel right now, but this is a very favorable matchup, and he's been very good against Utah this season. In 3 games, he's averaged 40 fantasy points, so I think he has a lot of potential for a good game here. Like I said, Oklahoma City's a team that you could definitely stack up with SJ Holmgren and Jalen Williams, so that's definitely something I could consider today. Looking at Karis LeVert for Cleveland, now they have a really tough matchup against Miami, but and he's not cheap anymore. But with Mitchell out, he gets all the and Struss out, he's going to get all the minutes he can handle and all the usage upside. And this game is pretty tight, so that does give him some utility. He's squarely a GPP play for me, but he's somebody you have to consider based on his potential. Jalen Williams for Oklahoma City is a guy I really like today. He's got some really good upside in this matchup. He's a little bit underpriced, and he's a very favorable situation against Utah. He's also averaged almost 40 fantasy points a game against them this season. So he's a guy that I do think is pretty much a core play. Not only that, but power forward is probably one of the weakest positions on this particular slate. I say that, but there's 2 guys at that position that are really good. But that is one of the weaker from that perspective. Looking at Malik Monk for Sacramento, obviously he carries some risk as he does have that lower floor, but he's been playing very well recently, and he gets a nice little boost with both Lyles and Heater out. So I do think he's going to be one of the better options from Sacramento. And if you were to, put in Sabonis, you might want to mix in Monk with that. And then you could also look at Keegan Murray, who I'll mention here in a minute. Another guy I do like, though, in this price range is Gary Trent Jr. Let's see. Writing 2 words at the same time. So Gary Trent Jr. has some very interesting upside today. The last 4 games he's played a lot of minutes with all the injuries, and he's really ramped up his fantasy output. His price is also not ideal at $6,000, but he can definitely eclipse that. And so he's definitely in play on this slate. He's very close to me a core play, but he hasn't been very good throughout the season up until recently. So that's one of the reasons why I'm a little bit not sure how to use him, as this is not the most ideal matchup for him. But he's playing well right now, and that's definitely worth a look. Looking at Bobby Portis now, if he is very, very close to being a core play, he could also play power forward. And the reason he's not is simply because he's playing Boston, who could be a tough game. But he's had 2 really solid games against Boston this season. With Giannis being out, though, he is going to have a lot of potential today, and that should give him a lot of high ceiling. He is very close to being a core play, but you can move him into that power forward or forwards or center spot for that matter. He was about as close as you can get without actually being one. Keegan Murray is an interesting play today. Now, I don't think he has as much upside today as Monk does, but he still does have a lot of upside. And in fact, if you go with a full Sacramento stack, which you could do today, he does have that utility today against Toronto, so I do think he has some potential for a big game. But he definitely carries a little bit of risk. Then we're going to look at Jonte Porter. These are some value plays here. He plays center for Toronto. He should get more and more minutes. He's had 4 straight games over 20 fantasy points, and he's been over the 21 that the 20 that we need in those 4 games. This is interesting because he is going to get the minutes here, but they're in the mid-20s minutes wise. He does need to score about a fantasy point a minute. If he can get a few extra minutes and potentially get a double-double, but he hasn't done that yet this season, really, so it's really unlikely for that. He is getting some blocks, though, so do keep that in mind. So he's not a must-play, but he's definitely an interesting play on the slate. Then we'll look at Norwell for Toronto as well. Now, he's only had a few good games recently, but he should get more minutes, and he has some potential in this one. He's also been over 21 fantasy points in 3 straight. I don't think he's going to have a huge game with like 40 fantasy points or something, but he definitely has some potential today for a solid game. But he's high risk, high reward. Same goes for Jay Crowder, who should get a lot of upside minutes in this game with Giannis out. He played a lot more minutes as a result of Giannis the last game getting hurt, and I do think he has some potential here to have a big game, but he definitely has that extremely low floor, and so he makes it a little bit hard. And then I wanted to mention Grady Dick. Yeah, he's going to play some minutes today with all the injuries to the Raptors. In the last 4 games, he's had 4 kind of awful games and 1 big game. And so he definitely has that potential, but he's extremely high risk, high reward. I won't be playing him, but if you like his risky potential, then he's definitely somebody that's worth taking a look at. So with that said, let's move over to the college basketball here. So we're going to start with the Grambling Montana State game, and this is this game between 2 16 seeds. and Montana State is favored to win this game by 3.5 points, and it has a 134-point total. This is a pretty even matchup when it comes to the fantasy aspect. We got a few guys on each team that we like, but we'll start with the Montana State here, as they are the favorites. Now, Ford is clearly the best player in this game by a lot. He has the most fantasy upside by anybody in this game by quite a bit, and so he is the de facto guy for my core play, or for my core play and for captain. He just has too high of a potential fantasy wise to ignore that. The other thing I'm going to mention for Montana is that, for Montana State, is that they have a couple value plays that really give them some upside. But I'm also going to mention Eddie Turner here. Now, Turner's played very well. He doesn't have the highest floors, but he does have a good ceiling, and he has had some big games throughout the season, so I think he's definitely a viable option. He's also the third or fourth best player on this team, and he is the second best stat guy, so if you need guys that get peripheral stats, he's definitely that. Robert Ford is clearly the number one peripheral stat player on this entire game, so that's why a lot to do with his being the top option. But I do have two value plays that I don't know, how you're gonna should decide how to maneuver these guys. But Brandon Walker is just $2,200, and his minutes, while they are limited, he does start, and he's been mostly over 15 fantasy points throughout the season. He's averaging 20 on the year. With this $2,200 price tag, he seems like a clear nearly must play on this one. I don't know how not to play him, quite frankly, because of that price, and he's just got too much upside here. But I am going to mention Late as well. Now, he plays a lot more minutes than Walker does, and he comes off the bench. He's also had some pretty big games. He doesn't average as many fantasy points as Walker does, but he also didn't play as much during the early part of the season, and he really started to ramp up after the midseason, minutes-wise, and into the postseason. So he's definitely somebody I think has a lot of potential. But I don't see. I do see that there's ways that you could literally use both of these guys, but it's obviously going to leave a lot of money on the table. And if you look at, like, if you just have Ford as your captain and you have both those guys in here, you're basically just doing a pick 'em for the other three spots. So do keep that in mind here. Moving up to Montana State, though, we are going to look at a couple options, or sorry, at Grambling here, where you got a few options to look at. The first guy is going to be Morton. Now, he's their best player, and he's got as much upside as anybody on the slate, with the exception of Ford, really. He's just a little bit overpriced here, but he does, and he doesn't get the stats that Ford does, but he is a tough play considering the fact that he's about the same price, and I just think Ford is a better play. But if you think Grambling can win this game, which I don't really think so at this point, I think that Morton would be the guy to move into captain if you wanted to. Looking at Jordan Smith here for Grambling as well. He's really their second or third best player fantasy-wise, and he has a lower floor than I like with the price, but there isn't a lot to like from Grambling, so he's here. Most likely, he's going to have a pretty solid game, but he's definitely carrying some risk with that high price tag. But if you put in three or four guys from Montana, and then you want to have two guys from Grambling, then he would definitely be somebody I would consider. The other guy I would consider a lot is Antoine Burnett. Now, Burnett actually probably be the safest player on this team based on his price and things. He's still a little overpriced, and he does have a low floor, but he's played fairly well in certain games, and this is a situation where he has some upside, so I do think he's got some utility in this one, and he gets plenty of minutes. And he also has better rebounding potentials than most of the rest of the players on this team, so that gives him a little bit of upside. It's really kind of annoying to pick and choose between anybody else on Grambling. I just think that there's really three guys there that you have to consider. And then for Montana State, I mean, you have some other guys like Goraki, who's very high risk, high reward, but that's pretty much what I have for that game. I do think Ford and Walker are must plays, and then you have to kind of go from there. Looking over at this Colorado Boise State game, this is not nearly as easy game to pick from as that first game, and so I've kind of broken it down into two ways to go about this. I do think that you could use Simpson or Degenhart as your captains, though there isn't a ton of value on this thing. So if you do use one of those guys as captains, you're going to have to and you're going to have to use some value plays in this slate, and I do have a couple guys to consider. But I think if you use Simpson, then you want to maneuver Luke O'Brien into your lineup, and if you use Deeganhart, then you're going to want to use Robbie Anderson in your lineup just to get you the value play to help you. And another play I really like a lot is Max Rice. I think he's probably a guy that you're going to have in your lineup just because of his price tag and his potential on this one. And that kind of fits you in when it comes to that, though, from a price perspective, it's definitely going to carry some risk there. Then what we're going to show here is we're going to have a couple other expensive guys in Stanley and De Silva. Both these guys have some utility today, but I do think De Silva is slightly better. I think Colorado's probably going to win this game, and that's going to give their guys a little bit more upside. But Stanley is also a good player, and they both have a lot of potential. I just think De Silva has been better. If we look at the $7,000 price range guys, and Agbu and Hadley, I do like Hadley slightly better than Agbu. Similar just about every, this seems like these two teams are pretty much matched up price wise like this, and so I do think that those two guys have some potential today, and you could probably find ways to mix and match and have both guys in there. I think that De Silva and Stanley are a little bit riskier than Agbu and Hadley when it comes to prices and things like that. Looking at the $7,000 range, we basically have Lampkin and Rice, and I like Rice a lot better than Lampkin today, but Lampkin does have that high ceiling, which is something you have to look at and consider. And then I would avoid anybody below the 5,000 price point that's here. I think Robbie Anderson and Luke O'Brien are probably the best options from the value plays on the slate. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.